She found a man bleeding in her garage. The Mafia boss awoke, saying a single mom saved him. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to the main character. Sarah Johnson had always lived a quiet life in the suburbs of Chicago. At 32, she was a single mother to a bright 6-year-old boy named Ethan. She worked 2 jobs, one as a part-time nurse at a local clinic and another as a receptionist at a nearby wellness center. Sarah was exhausted, but she kept pushing herself, knowing that every day was a step closer to providing a better future for Ethan. That night, after a long shift, Sarah returned home to find the garage door slightly ajar. It wasn't unusual. Sometimes the wind played tricks with the mechanism. But as she stepped out of her car, she noticed something different. The sound of muffled groans reached her ears. Her heart raced as she approached the garage. There, lying against the wall, was a man, blood pooling around him, his face pale. Panic shot through her as she realized the severity of the situation. Without thinking, she rushed inside, grabbed a towel, and pressed it against the man's wound. He was unconscious, and his breathing was shallow. His clothes were expensive, too expensive for someone she'd ever seen in her neighborhood. This wasn't someone who belonged here. His body was covered in scratches and bruises, a sign of a violent struggle. Sarah's mind raced. Who was he? What happened? Why was he here? Despite the danger, she kept pressure on the wound, hoping to stabilize him. The man groaned again, his eyes fluttering open for a brief moment. He looked confused, his gaze locking onto Sarah's for just a second before his body relaxed again. Please, don't die, she whispered, her voice trembling. It was all she could say, a desperate plea for someone she didn't even know. As the minutes passed, Sarah's adrenaline started to wear off, and exhaustion took over. She tried calling 911, but her hands were shaking so much that she couldn't get a clear call through. She cursed under her breath, feeling utterly powerless. Then, the man stirred again, and this time, his eyes opened fully. The first thing he saw was Sarah's face, and something in his eyes seemed to change. His gaze softened slightly, almost as if recognizing something familiar. But before Sarah could ask if he was okay, he muttered something in a voice that barely rose above a whisper. You saved me. You saved me. His words were slurred, his face contorting as he tried to focus. Sarah could barely process what he was saying. The man blinked at her again, his voice more coherent now. I don't know who you are, but thank you. His voice was rough, deep, commanding even, but there was a vulnerability in it that made Sarah feel a bit more at ease. She couldn't help but wonder who he was, but for now, all she could do was keep him alive. Sarah looked at the blood on her hands, realizing how much she had been drawn into something she had no business being a part of. Yet here she was, saving a life in her garage, someone who didn't seem like he belonged in her world at all. She continued to press the towel against his wound, trying to stabilize him as best as she could. His breathing grew steadier, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she had just gotten herself caught in something far bigger than herself. As Sarah continued to press the cloth to the man's wound, her hands shook, her mind racing with questions. Who was he? Why was he here? Why had she been the one to find him, of all people? Her thoughts were interrupted when the man stirred again, this time more alert. His eyes met hers, and for a moment, they locked in silence. You're a nurse? He asked, his voice rough but clearer now. Sarah nodded, her heart still pounding. I'm just someone trying to help, she replied quietly. The man's lips curved into a faint, pained smile. You're more than that. You saved my life, he said, his tone carrying a strange sense of gratitude. She wasn't sure how to respond. She didn't know who this man was, but somehow, she felt a deep connection in that brief moment. We need to get you to the hospital, she said, more to herself than to him. His gaze softened for a brief second, as if he were weighing his options. It's too late for that, he murmured, then winced as he tried to sit up. His strength seemed to ebb as he collapsed back onto the floor. Sarah bit her lip, panic rising. He wasn't out of the woods yet. She needed to keep him stable, but she didn't know how much longer she could hold him together. The man's breathing slowed, and his eyes closed for a moment, his face contorted in pain. Sarah's mind raced, but she stayed calm, focusing on the task at hand. She couldn't afford to lose him now, not after everything she had done. As time passed, she managed to get him more comfortable, wrapping a fresh cloth around his wound. The whole time, she was acutely aware of how strange it felt to be in this situation. Here she was, in her garage, helping a man who had appeared out of nowhere and had a life she couldn't even begin to imagine. Eventually, his breathing became more steady, and he opened his eyes again, looking at Sarah with a mix of confusion and recognition. "I didn't expect to end up here," he muttered. "In your garage. I don't know who you are, but you saved me." There was something about the way he spoke that made Sarah's chest tighten. It was as if he had resigned himself to this fate, as if he didn't expect anyone to help him. She swallowed hard, trying to push the unease out of her mind. "My name's Sarah," she said, her voice steady but tinged with uncertainty. "Sarah Johnson. You're going to be okay. I won't let you die here." The man nodded slowly, his gaze turning distant for a moment. "I'm Nicholas," he said quietly. "Nicholas Romano." Sarah froze for a second. The name sounded familiar, but she couldn't place it. She glanced at him, trying to understand what kind of man he was. Her intuition told her that he wasn't just any ordinary person, but beyond that, she couldn't quite put her finger on why. Nicholas's eyes fluttered again, and he let out a shallow breath. "I'm in your debt," he said, his voice heavy with exhaustion. Sarah didn't know how to respond to that. What did it mean to be in debt to someone like him? The Mafia boss she had just saved. She thought back to the moment when she had first found him, lying there, blood pouring from his wound. It was almost surreal. How had this all happened? How had she ended up in this situation? She sat back on her heels, feeling the weight of everything that had just occurred settle over her. Nicholas's soft voice broke her thoughts. "You've done enough. You saved my life. I can't let you go without offering something in return." She shook her head, not knowing what he was offering, but knowing that she needed nothing from him. She wasn't sure if she was ready for whatever that something might be. But there was no going back now. This man, Nicholas Romano, had just become a part of her life in a way she never imagined. And somehow, her life would never be the same again. It had been 2 days since Sarah found Nicholas Romano in her garage, and she had barely been able to get a full night's sleep since. The man, though physically stable now, remained a mystery. He had been in and out of consciousness, his strength returning slowly, but his mind seemed to be somewhere else entirely. He hadn't spoken much, only thanking her over and over. It was hard for Sarah to process everything that had happened so quickly. She kept replaying the moment when Nicholas had opened his eyes and said her name, his voice heavy with exhaustion. Nicholas Romano. The name struck her, but she couldn't figure out why. He wasn't just any man. There was something about him that felt different, something that hinted at power and danger. Sarah shook the thought away. He was here now, in her home, recovering because of her. That was all that mattered. She had to focus on that. The doorbell rang, breaking her thoughts. She quickly went to the door and opened it, surprised to find a delivery man holding a large box. "Delivery for Ms. Sarah Johnson," the man said, handing her the package. She signed for it, her curiosity piqued. She hadn't ordered anything. As she carried the package inside, she noticed a note attached to it. It simply read, "For your help. N.R." Her heart skipped a beat. The package was from Nicholas. Inside, she found a beautiful silver bracelet, engraved with intricate designs, along with a small envelope. The card inside read, "I can't repay you for what you've done, but I can offer this. N.R." Sarah stared at the bracelet, unsure of what to make of it. She wasn't looking for anything in return for helping him, but there was something unsettling about receiving such an expensive gift from a man she barely knew. She placed the bracelet on the counter and went back to the living room, where Nicholas was sitting, looking out the window. His eyes followed her as she sat down across from him. "You didn't have to send this," she said, her voice steady, but her eyes betrayed her. "You've already saved me," Nicholas replied softly. "It's not just about the physical help, Sarah. You gave me something more. A chance." His words lingered in the air, but Sarah was too distracted by the heavy weight of his gaze to respond right away. She was still trying to understand what that meant, what it meant for her. A chance? A chance for what? Nicholas had been careful not to share too much about himself. He seemed reluctant to talk about his past, even though Sarah had asked several times. He would always deflect, changing the subject, or focusing on something else. But there was something in his eyes, something in the way he looked at her, that made her feel like she was being pulled into something much larger than herself. "Why are you here, Nicholas?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The question hung in the air between them. Nicholas turned to face her, his expression softening. "I could tell you that I'm here because I owe you my life, Sarah," he said. "But it's more than that. I know what you're thinking, that I'm just some stranger who got lucky. But I've been watching you, and I don't think it's a coincidence that you found me that night." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. "Watching me? What?" Nicholas sighed, leaning back against the couch. "Because you have something that most people don't. A strength. A quiet power. And I think you're someone who could help me. In ways you don't yet understand." Sarah was speechless. She had no idea what he meant, but something about his words struck a chord with her. She had always thought of herself as just an ordinary woman, someone who went about her life, took care of her son, and worked to make ends meet. But Nicholas was seeing something in her that she hadn't even seen in herself. She stood up and walked over to the window, trying to process everything. What was he asking of her? And why did she feel so compelled to listen? "What are you offering me, Nicholas?" she asked, turning back to face him. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stood and walked over to her, his footsteps heavy but purposeful. "What I'm offering is a chance," he repeated, his voice low and steady. "A chance to be more than just a mother. More than just a woman who goes through life quietly. I can help you, Sarah. I can offer you something that no one else can. But it's not just about what I can give you. It's about what you're willing to accept." Sarah's heart raced, her thoughts swirling. She didn't know what he meant, but she felt like she was standing on the edge of something big, something that could change everything. She looked at him, the weight of his words sinking in. Was she ready to accept whatever he was offering? Or would she walk away from something that could change the course of her life? Sarah stood in the dim light of her living room, her mind racing with Nicholas's words. A chance. What was he offering her? It sounded too good to be true, and yet, there was a part of her, deep down, that felt drawn to him, to the life he could offer. But she wasn't naive. She had always worked hard for everything she had, and nothing had ever come easy. She glanced at Ethan, who was playing in the next room, unaware of the tension that had filled the air between Sarah and Nicholas. The thought of uprooting their lives was overwhelming. Sarah knew what it meant to be responsible. She couldn't just throw everything away because of some vague promise of a better life. But Nicholas wasn't just some man off the street. He was different. There was an undeniable strength in him, a calm power that made her want to believe him. But could she? "You said you've been watching me," Sarah said slowly, turning back to face him. "What does that mean exactly?" Nicholas didn't seem offended by her question. In fact, he seemed to expect it. He looked at her with those piercing eyes, and for a moment, Sarah felt as if he was seeing straight through her. "I've been watching, yes," he said, his voice calm. "But not in the way you think. I'm not some stalker. I just know the world you live in. The struggle. You work hard, Sarah. You take care of Ethan. You do what's necessary to survive. I've been where you are. I know how it feels to fight every day, just to stay afloat." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. How could he possibly know what it was like for her? But before she could ask more questions, Nicholas continued. "What I'm offering you isn't just about money or power. It's about security. A life without constant worry. I can give you that, if you'll accept it." Sarah's mind was swirling. A life without constant worry. That sounded almost too perfect. But at what cost? She looked at Nicholas, studying him carefully. "And what do you want in return?" she asked, her voice steady, though inside, she felt a knot form in her stomach. Nicholas's lips twitched into a faint smile, but it wasn't a smile of amusement. It was the smile of a man who had seen it all, who had lived a life most people could never imagine. "What I want in return is simple," he said. "I want your loyalty, your trust, and I want you to understand that when I offer protection, I mean it. I don't offer it lightly. And once you accept it, you'll be part of something bigger than yourself. Something that could change everything." Sarah felt the weight of his words settle heavily on her chest. This wasn't just some business transaction. This was more than that. This was a commitment. A commitment to a life she didn't fully understand yet. She could feel her thoughts spiraling, but she couldn't deny the truth in his words. Could she really walk away from this? Could she walk away from a life where she didn't have to worry about the bills piling up or what might happen to Ethan if something happened to her? Could she trust Nicholas? She looked at him, trying to gauge his intentions. There was a part of her that wanted to trust him, but another part, her protective, cautious side, was screaming for her to step back. I don't know if I can just take your word for it, Sarah said quietly. This is a lot to process. I'm not the kind of person who jumps into things blindly. Nicholas nodded, his expression thoughtful. I understand. I'm not asking you to trust me right away. Take your time. But know this, Sarah, what I'm offering isn't something I can just take back. Once you're in, there's no turning back. But I will be there for you. And I'll be there for Ethan. I'll make sure nothing happens to either of you. Sarah's heart clenched at the mention of her son. She had always been his protector, the one who made sure he was safe. But now, with Nicholas in the picture, everything felt different. She had always dreamed of a life where she didn't have to worry so much. A life where she didn't have to struggle. But was Nicholas the answer? Or was he just another complication? She took a deep breath and turned to face him fully. I need time to think about this, she said, her voice firm. I can't make any decisions right now, but I'll let you know what I decide. Nicholas nodded again, his eyes understanding. Take all the time you need, he said quietly. But remember, you don't have to do this alone. I'm here. Sarah turned away, her mind heavy with the weight of his offer. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long while, she felt as though there was a possibility for something better, something she had never dared to hope for. And as she looked at Ethan, playing innocently in the next room, she realized that no matter what happened, she would do whatever it took to keep him safe. Even if that meant stepping into a world she didn't understand. Even if that meant trusting Nicholas Romano. The next few days passed in a blur for Sarah. She couldn't shake the weight of Nicholas's words from her mind. He had offered her something she had never imagined. A life without worry. A life where she didn't have to fight every single day just to make ends meet. But the price of that life was still unclear. She found herself torn between what he was offering and the life she had, carefully built with Ethan. Every time she looked at him, she reminded herself that she had to do what was best for him. He was her world, and nothing else mattered more than his safety and happiness. Still, the pull of Nicholas's offer was hard to ignore. She found herself thinking about him more often than she wanted to admit. Even though he hadn't pushed her for an answer, every time they spoke, there was an underlying sense of urgency in his voice, as if he were waiting for her to make up her mind. It wasn't just his words that haunted her, it was the way he made her feel. There was something about him, something that made her feel both safe and uneasy at the same time. One afternoon, Sarah decided to take a walk to clear her head. She needed to think, to figure out what she really wanted. As she strolled through the quiet streets of her neighborhood, her phone buzzed in her pocket. It was a message from Nicholas. Asterisk, we need to talk. Can you meet me tonight? Asterisk, she stared at the message for a moment, unsure of what to do. She had avoided him the past few days, needing the space to process everything. But something about his message made her stomach tighten. She had to see him, if only to finally get some clarity. That evening, she arrived at the small cafe Nicholas had asked her to meet him at. It was a cozy, dimly lit place, not far from where she lived. As she walked in, her eyes immediately found him. He was sitting at a table by the window, looking out at the street, but when he saw her, his eyes softened. Thank you for coming, he said, his voice low and calm, as always. I know you've been thinking about everything I said. Sarah sat down across from him, her hands folded in her lap. I have. I just need to understand what all of this means, she said, her voice steady, though her heart was racing. Nicholas nodded, leaning forward slightly. What I'm offering you is not something I expect you to jump into without thinking. I want you to understand that I'm not trying to control you. But I can offer you more than just protection. I can offer you a chance to have a life you never thought possible. He paused, letting his words settle in the air between them. You don't have to make a decision right now, but I need you to know that I'm serious. I won't force you into anything, but you won't have to do this alone, Sarah. Sarah took a deep breath, her mind racing again. She had always prided herself on her independence, but the idea of a life with less struggle, less worry, was so tempting. I don't know if I'm ready for this, she said, the words slipping out before she could stop them. Nicholas's eyes softened, and for the first time, Sarah saw a vulnerability in him. I'm not asking you to be ready, he said quietly. I'm asking you to trust me. Trust that what I'm offering is real. You don't have to do anything you're not comfortable with. The sincerity in his voice made Sarah's heart skip a beat. He wasn't pressuring her, but there was an undeniable pull, a feeling that maybe, just maybe, this could be the change she had been waiting for. She looked at him, trying to read him, to understand if he was telling the truth. "Why me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why did you choose me?" Nicholas didn't hesitate. "Because I see something in you, Sarah. You're stronger than you realize. And you deserve more than this life of constant worry. I can give you that. I can give you a future where you don't have to fight for everything you have. And most importantly, I can protect you." Sarah swallowed hard, the weight of his words pressing down on her. She had always done everything on her own. But now, with Nicholas offering her a way out of the constant struggle, she wondered if it was time to let go of her pride and accept the help she so desperately needed. The thought of trusting him, of stepping into a world she knew nothing about, was terrifying. But the thought of continuing the way she had been, struggling every day just to keep her head above water, was even more so. She looked at Nicholas, her heart pounding in her chest. "I don't know if I'm ready to trust you completely," she admitted, her voice barely audible. "But I want to believe you. I want to believe that this isn't just some game for you." Nicholas leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "I don't play games, Sarah," he said softly. "I never have. This is real, and I'm offering you a chance to make it real for yourself. But only if you're willing to take that first step." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long while, she felt as though she had a choice. A choice to change her life, to step into something bigger than herself. And maybe, just maybe, she was ready to take that step. The next few days passed in a blur for Sarah, and still, she couldn't shake the feeling of being pulled in two different directions. Nicholas's offer lingered in the back of her mind, no matter how hard she tried to ignore it. She couldn't deny the allure of the life he promised, a life where she wouldn't have to constantly worry about bills, about the future, about keeping Ethan safe. But she also knew that accepting his offer meant stepping into a world she knew nothing about, a world of power, secrecy, and danger. One night, as she sat on the couch after putting Ethan to bed, Sarah couldn't stop herself from reaching for her phone. Nicholas had sent a message earlier that day, asking if she had made up her mind. She hesitated before typing a response. Asterisk, "I'm still thinking about it." Asterisk, she pressed send, and before she could second-guess herself, her phone buzzed. Asterisk, "Take your time. But know this, you have a place in my world if you want it." Asterisk, that was all. She stared at the message for a long moment, her fingers lingering on the screen. Her heart raced as she wondered what that place in his world would truly look like. The next morning, as she stood in the kitchen, making breakfast for Ethan, she felt a weight settle in her chest. She couldn't keep going like this, torn between the life she knew and the possibility of something more. She needed answers. That afternoon, after dropping Ethan off at school, Sarah drove to the address Nicholas had given her the night they spoke. It was a luxurious building in downtown Chicago, far from her quiet neighborhood. As she walked into the lobby, she couldn't help but feel out of place. The polished marble floors and the sleek, modern design screamed wealth and power, but it was the men in suits standing by the elevators that caught her attention. They were watching her closely, as if they knew exactly who she was and why she was there. Nicholas was waiting for her in a private room, his back to the door when she entered. He turned around as she walked in, his expression unreadable. "You came," he said simply. Sarah nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. "I need to know what I'm walking into," she said, her voice steady despite the anxiety that gripped her. "I can't just accept your offer without understanding what it means for me, for Ethan." Nicholas stepped closer, his gaze never leaving hers. "I understand your hesitation," he said, his voice low and calm. "But know this, what I offer is not just protection. It's a chance to live a life you never thought possible. A life where you don't have to worry about surviving. A life where you can thrive." Sarah felt the weight of his words. The idea of thriving, of finally living without constant stress, was so tempting. But at what cost? "And what do I have to give in return?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Nicholas's lips twitched into a small, almost imperceptible smile. "Loyalty, trust, and an understanding that once you accept my help, you'll be part of something much bigger than you can imagine." Sarah felt a shiver run down her spine. "Bigger than me?" she echoed, her voice thick with disbelief. "What does that even mean?" Nicholas's eyes darkened slightly, but his expression remained composed. It means that I will protect you and Ethan. No one will hurt you. But it also means that you'll have to accept the realities of the world I live in. It's not a simple world, Sarah. It's a world where power, respect, and loyalty are everything. Sarah felt a knot tighten in her stomach. She didn't know if she was ready for that world, but the thought of a future without fear, without constant worry, was something she couldn't ignore. And what happens if I say no? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Nicholas's gaze softened, and for a moment, there was a trace of something almost vulnerable in his eyes. You don't have to decide now, he said. But if you walk away, know that you'll be walking away from everything I can offer, and you'll be walking away from a chance to change your life forever. Sarah's mind raced, but deep down, she knew that Nicholas was right. She couldn't keep living like this, always struggling, always worrying. She had worked so hard for so long, but there had to be more to life than this. What do I need to do? She asked, her voice steady but filled with uncertainty. Nicholas stepped closer, his gaze intense. Trust me, Sarah. That's all I need. And once you do, everything will fall into place. Sarah stood there, her heart racing as she stared at him, trying to make sense of everything he had said. She didn't know if she was ready to take the leap, but she knew one thing for sure. She couldn't keep living in the shadow of fear. Maybe it was time to trust him. Maybe it was time to step into the world he had promised her. Sarah woke up the next morning with a new sense of clarity. The conversation with Nicholas had been a turning point, and now, more than ever, she was aware of the weight of the decision she had to make. She had spent her whole life trying to keep things simple, work hard, take care of Ethan, make sure they had what they needed. But now, it felt like her life had been turned upside down. Nicholas's offer was everything she had ever dreamed of, but it came with strings she didn't fully understand. And that was what scared her the most. Could she really trust him? Could she trust the world he was offering her? She thought about Ethan, playing in the living room with his toys. His innocent laughter filled the air, and for a moment, she let herself believe in the possibility of a better future. She had always done what was best for him, and if accepting Nicholas's offer meant a better life for both of them, maybe it was worth the risk. She stood up from the bed, her decision made. She needed to meet with him again. She didn't have all the answers, but she knew she couldn't let fear hold her back. She needed to know if what Nicholas had promised was real or just an illusion. When she arrived at the office building later that day, the lobby was quiet, and the air felt heavy with anticipation. As she walked towards the elevator, she caught the glances of the men in suits stationed around the building. They were all watching her, but there was no fear in her chest this time, only determination. Nicholas was waiting for her in the same private room as before, his back to the door as he looked out at the city. He didn't turn around when she entered, but his presence was magnetic. He always had this way of making her feel like she was the only person in the room. You came, he said, his voice calm as he turned to face her. I've been thinking about everything, Sarah began, her voice steady, but her heart racing. And I've made my decision. Nicholas stepped closer, his eyes never leaving hers. I'm listening. Sarah took a deep breath, finding the strength she needed to speak. I don't know what this world you're offering me looks like, Nicholas. But I do know that I can't keep living the way I've been living. I can't keep struggling, always worrying about what's next. I need something more than this. And if what you're offering is real, then maybe it's time for me to take that step. Nicholas's eyes softened, and for the first time, Sarah saw a glimmer of warmth in his gaze. You're not alone in this, Sarah, he said, his voice low. I won't let you face it alone. Sarah felt a wave of relief wash over her. This was it, the moment she had been waiting for. She was ready to take the leap, to trust him, to trust this world he was offering her. What happens now? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Nicholas smiled, a small, knowing smile. Now, we begin, he said, his tone filled with promise. I'll take care of the rest. But this, he paused, his gaze intense. This is your new beginning. Sarah felt a rush of emotion, a mix of excitement and fear, but above all, a sense of possibility. This was her chance for something more, something better. She could feel it in her bones. The future was waiting for her, and it was no longer just a dream. It was real. And Nicholas Romano, the man who had once seemed like nothing more than a stranger, was now the key to unlocking that future. Sarah took a step forward, ready to face whatever came next. She didn't know what the next chapter of her life would look like, but for the first time, She felt ready to live it. She had made her choice, and there was no turning back now. The next few weeks passed in a blur for Sarah. Nicholas had kept his promise. She was no longer struggling, no longer living in fear of the next bill or the next crisis. Her life had changed, and it felt surreal. Every day was different now. Her work at the clinic had become less stressful, and even Ethan had noticed how much more relaxed she seemed. He didn't fully understand the changes, but he could sense the difference in the air. Sarah had finally accepted that she couldn't continue living the way she had been. She needed the security, the support that Nicholas was offering. It wasn't just about the money or the protection. It was the freedom to breathe, to think, to plan for the future without the constant weight of uncertainty. But as time went on, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to Nicholas than he was letting on. He had been kind to her, generous even, but there were still pieces of his world she didn't fully understand. Nicholas had told her that he wasn't interested in controlling her, that he wanted her to have her independence. But sometimes, when she watched him in the quiet moments, she wondered if there was a part of him that wanted more than that. He had warned her that his world was complicated, and though he had shown her only the parts that seemed safe, there was always a sense of something darker just beneath the surface. One evening, Sarah decided to confront him. She couldn't keep ignoring the questions that lingered in her mind. She found Nicholas in his office, his attention focused on a series of papers in front of him. He looked up when she entered, his expression calm but guarded. "Is everything okay?" he asked, his voice steady. Sarah took a deep breath. "I need to know more, Nicholas. About this world you're offering me. I can't keep living in the dark. I need to understand what it really means to be part of this." Nicholas didn't immediately answer. He set the papers down. Slowly, his eyes never leaving hers. For a moment, the silence between them felt heavy, like the weight of something unspoken was pressing in on them. Finally, he spoke. "You want the truth?" he asked, his voice quieter now. "The truth is that this world isn't easy. It's not clean, and it's not simple. It's a world where power and loyalty matter more than anything else. And once you're in it, you can't just walk away. You can't pretend it doesn't exist. But I've kept you at arm's length, Sarah. I've shielded you from the darker parts because I wanted you to have a choice. I wanted you to feel like you still had control." Sarah's heart raced. She had known that there was more to Nicholas's world than he had let on, but hearing him say it out loud made it all feel much more real. She took a step forward, her voice firm. "So what happens now? What do you want from me?" Nicholas stood up from his desk, walking over to her. His gaze softened as he looked at her, but there was something in his eyes that told her he wasn't going to sugarcoat the truth. "I want you to understand that I'm not asking for your loyalty out of greed. I'm asking because you've already become a part of this, Sarah. You've already seen too much. But that doesn't mean I'm going to throw you into the fire without protection. I'll make sure you're safe, no matter what. But you have to decide, once and for all, if you're in this with me." Sarah swallowed hard. She had always been independent, always believed that she could make it on her own. But this was different. Nicholas wasn't just offering her protection. He was offering her a place in a world that she had never known. And despite the fear that gripped her, there was a part of her that wanted to accept it. She had spent too many years living in survival mode, too many years wondering if she would ever get ahead. This was her chance to break free from that, to build something better. She looked at Nicholas, her decision finally made. "I'm in," she said, her voice steady. Nicholas's expression softened, and for a brief moment, he looked relieved. "Good," he said quietly. "Then let's make this work. Together." Sarah felt a wave of emotion wash over her. She didn't know what the future would hold, but for the first time, she felt like she was in control of her own destiny. She wasn't alone anymore, and she didn't have to face the challenges of her world by herself. Whatever came next, she was ready. And she knew that, with Nicholas by her side, she could handle anything. Days turned into weeks, and Sarah was adjusting to her new reality. The life she had once known was no longer hers, replaced by something unfamiliar but strangely comforting. Nicholas had kept his word. He was there for her, not just in moments of need, but in everyday life. It was as if a weight had been lifted off her shoulders. The constant stress of survival had faded, and she found herself focusing more on Ethan, on building a better future for them both. Ethan had taken to the changes well, his laughter filling their home more than it ever had before. Sarah had the time to enjoy his company, to see him flourish, and it brought her more peace than she had ever known. But despite the new sense of security, a part of Sarah couldn't fully relax. Nicholas was still a mystery to her in many ways. She didn't know the full extent of his world, and sometimes, late at night, she found herself wondering if she truly understood what she had gotten herself into. It wasn't that Nicholas had done anything to make her feel unsafe. Quite the opposite. He was protective, caring in his own way, and kept his promise to keep her and Ethan safe. But there was always something about him, something guarded in his eyes, that made her wonder what he wasn't telling her. One evening, as she sat on the balcony, watching the sunset, Nicholas came up behind her, his presence as commanding as ever. "Penny for your thoughts?" he asked, his voice low and calm. But there was a hint of concern in his tone. Sarah turned to face him, her heart racing slightly. "I've been thinking about everything," she said, the words coming more easily now. "About how much has changed." Nicholas raised an eyebrow, taking a step closer. "Is that a problem?" he asked, his gaze never leaving hers. Sarah hesitated. "No, not exactly. It's just, I need to understand more, Nicholas. I can't keep living in the dark. I need to know what this world really is." Nicholas looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he sighed softly. "I knew you'd want to know more. It's only fair that you do." He took a seat beside her, his posture relaxed, but there was a tension in his voice. "What I'm offering you isn't just a way out of the struggle. It's a commitment to a different life, a life where you're not just a part of my world, but where you shape it too." Sarah swallowed, trying to process his words. "Shape it? How?" "You've already seen it, Sarah," Nicholas replied, his eyes serious. "You've seen what I've built, and you've seen what's at stake. You can be part of this, not as a passive observer, but as someone who has a say, someone who influences the direction of things." Sarah blinked, unsure if she fully understood. "I don't want to be part of something I can't control," she said, her voice quiet but firm. Nicholas nodded slowly. "I don't expect you to control everything, but you have the power to shape your own path, even in this world. It's not about control. It's about influence. The choices you make will matter." Sarah felt a shiver run down her spine. The idea of being a part of something so large, something so intricate, was both exhilarating and terrifying. "What kind of choices?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "You'll see," Nicholas said, standing up and offering her a hand. "But it's a world where loyalty means everything. It's a world that's built on trust, on understanding what's at stake, and making sure the right decisions are made. And I trust you to make the right ones." Sarah took his hand, her heart racing. She had never imagined her life would come to this point. She had always been on the outside, looking in, never quite fitting in with the world she had grown up in. But now, with Nicholas, she was being invited into a world that was both dangerous and alluring. She had always believed in doing things on her own, in standing on her own 2 feet. But now, with him by her side, she wondered if there was more to life than just survival. As they walked inside together, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that she was standing at the edge of something bigger than herself. Nicholas had given her a chance, but she still wasn't sure if she was ready to fully accept it. But one thing was certain, she was no longer just a bystander. She was part of this world now, whether she was ready for it or not.